A North Korean soldier crossed the border into the south early this morning to defect. Jeju Island and southern regions are bracing for strong winds and heavy rain tonight as Typhoon Jongdari approaches the peninsula. In the U.S., the Democratic National Convention kicked off to officially choose Vice President Kamala Harris as the party's presidential nominee. The party has released its policy platform that renews America's commitment to South Korea against North Korea's provocations. It's August 20th, 6 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start with a North Korean soldier crossing the inter-Korean border early this morning and expressing their intention to defect. This comes only 12 days after another North Korean defected to the south by crossing the neutral zone of the Hangang River estuary. Our defense correspondent, Choi Min-jung, reports.
A North Korean soldier defected to South Korea on foot early on Tuesday. According to a South Korean military source, the soldier, who is reportedly a staff sergeant, crossed the military demarcation line in the northeastern county of Goseong-gun, Gangwon-do province. Wearing a military uniform, they are believed to have walked south using the road along the east coast. South Korea's military tracked and monitored the individual and conducted an operation to guide them into the south. The individual has been handed over to relevant authorities. The area where the crossover happened, Goseong, is close to where South Korea has been carrying out loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts in retaliation to North Korea's continued trash balloon deliveries. It's also near where North Korean soldiers were recently seen laying mines as part of the regime's efforts to prevent North Koreans from crossing the border.
You could say that the defection shows there's a loophole in North Korea's mine laying.
South Korea's unification ministry said that the number of defections by North Korean soldiers could be an indirect indicator of the conditions faced by the regime's soldiers near the border. Tuesday's border crossing comes less than 2 weeks after a North Korean resident defected to South Korea by crossing the maritime border. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. are currently holding joint air drills involving more than 200 fighter jets. The jets will be flying around the clock for 5 consecutive days, which is equal to around 120 hours of non-stop training. It'll also involve a record 2,000 sorties to enhance Seoul and Washington's wartime operational capabilities. This is also the first time that more than one fighter wing from each country is participating in the drill. The training is part of the Ulji Freedom Shield exercise, which kicked off on Monday and will last until Friday. The U.S. has announced its approval of the sale to South Korea of Apache attack helicopters and related equipment worth $3.5 billion. The sale still needs to go through Congress for final approval. Cha Eun-kyung has more.
The U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency, under the Department of Defense, said in a statement on Monday local time that South Korea requested the purchase of up to 36 AH-64E Apache attack helicopters and 72 related engines. The deal is worth some $3.5 billion or 4.7 trillion Korean won. The announcement came on the first day of the Ulji Freedom Shield, a major combined military exercise between Seoul and Washington. The DSCA explained that the proposed sale will improve the Republic of Korea's capability to meet current and future threats by providing a credible force capable of deterring adversaries and participating in regional operations. One way for South Korea to purchase U.S. weapons is foreign military sales through the U.S. government, and another is commercial purchase through the private U.S. defense companies. This sale of Apache attack helicopters is classed as foreign military sales and therefore needs approval by the U.S. Congress before it is finalized. South Korea previously purchased 36 AH-64E Apaches and started operating them since January 2017. Cha Eun-kyung, Arirang News.
The Supreme Court of Korea nominated on Tuesday the Seoul High Court presiding judge Kim Bok-hyeong to be the new justice of the Constitutional Court, replacing Justice Lee Eun-hye, who will retire next month. The Supreme Court described Kim as having extensive legal knowledge and skills acquired through nearly 30 years of experience. Kim is a Seoul National University law graduate, and she has sat on the Seoul Central District Court, among others. She will go through a parliamentary hearing before the president's official appointment. Her appointment would keep the number of female justices on the Constitutional Court at 3 out of the total of 9. Typhoon Jongdari is approaching the Korean peninsula and is affecting Jeju Island and southern regions with heavy rain and strong winds. The typhoon is expected to worsen the heat wave that's been already gripping the country. Lee Soo-jin with the latest.
Concerns about the effects of Typhoon Jongdari, especially on Jeju Island, are growing as it moves north. The Korean Meteorological Administration on Tuesday issued a typhoon advisory for parts of Jeju's coastal waters and its inner southern sea areas and a warning for the outer southern sea areas around the island. The KMA defines a typhoon as having a maximum wind speed at the center of at least 17 meters per second. As of 3 p.m., the maximum wind speed of Typhoon Jongdari is 19 meters per second, which is about 42 miles per hour. All 7 hiking trails on Hallasan Mountain have been restricted, and all passenger ferries to and from coastal ports in Jeju after 4 p.m. were cancelled. The island has seen maximum gusts of between 20 and 30 meters per second from Tuesday afternoon, and heavy rain accompanied by thunder and lightning is expected throughout the night. The KMA said on Tuesday that Typhoon Jongdari is expected to pass west of Seogwipo on the south coast of Jeju Island at 6 p.m., which is also when the effects of the storm will start impacting the entire Korean peninsula. And once it reaches Mokpo around midnight, it will be downgraded to a tropical storm and will head across the country towards Sokcho in Gangwon-do province. The typhoon has also raised concerns about the supply of electricity. Not only is the overall electricity demand expected to increase as typhoon brings in hot, humid air from the tropical seas, but rain clouds are expected to reduce solar power efficiency. The Honam region in the southern part of Korea is one area that is expected to be particularly affected by the typhoon, and it accounts for 40% of the nation's total solar power capacity. This comes as demand for electricity is extremely high, as Seoul is expecting its first ever month-long consecutive streak of tropical nights as of Tuesday. According to the KMA, Seoul has seen 30 straight days of tropical nights starting July 21st. While the rain is expected to temporarily lower temperatures on Wednesday and Thursday, they will go up again on Friday, with heat waves and tropical nights persisting until the end of the month. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The government and the ruling party today announced their key direction for next year's budget proposal. That included sharply increasing support for small businesses and expanding benefits for families with multiple children. Our correspondent Shin Ha-young has the details.
The government and ruling party will focus the 2025 budget on supporting vulnerable groups, boosting economic vitality, and preparing for the future.
As household finances are tight and domestic economic challenges are expected to persist, various physical and financial policy measures need to follow to address these issues.
During a meeting at the National Assembly on Tuesday, senior government officials and the People Power Party agreed to issue a record 5.5 trillion Korean won, or around $4 billion in gift certificates, offering discounts for goods at traditional markets to support small business owners.
We decided to reduce the number of restricted business types eligible for the coupons from the current 40 to 28.
To address the country's low birth rate and aging population, benefits for households with 2 or more children will be expanded. This includes increasing the subsidy for buying electric vehicles to up to 6 million won, or $4,500, which is double the current amount. Also, for families with 3 or more children, the discount rate on public transportation passes will be increased up to 50%. In response to growing safety concerns about electric vehicle batteries following recent EV fires, the two sides also agreed to deploy 90,000 EV chargers with fire prevention features and allocate extra funds for purchasing unmanned water cannons and other firefighting equipment. The PPP emphasized that the budget for next year aims to maintain sound financial management while also improving welfare for the socially vulnerable. The government plans to submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 2nd. 신하영, Arirang News.
The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office has indicted the driver involved in the deadly car crash near Seoul City Hall early last month. The 68-year-old man was taken to trial on Tuesday while under arrest under the Act concerning the settlement of traffic accidents. Investigation and forensic data confirmed that he had pressed the accelerator pedal instead of the brake. This contradicts the driver's claims that there was a sudden unintended acceleration of the vehicle and his brakes were malfunctioning. This accident left 9 dead and 5 injured. Over in the U.S., the Democratic National Convention has officially kicked off a day after releasing its new policy platform that pledged partnership with U.S. allies, including South Korea. Pei-Yun-ji explains.
U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris made a surprise appearance at the opening night of the party's 4-day national convention on Monday in Chicago. Crowds applauded and cheered as she encouraged attendees to vote and defeat her opponent Donald Trump.
Let us fight for the ideals we hold dear, and let us always remember, when we fight, we win.
President Joe Biden, who delivered a farewell speech, wiped away tears as he walked onto the stage following his daughter's emotional remarks about him. He endorsed the vice president and her running mate, Tim Walz, saying selecting Harris was the best decision he made in his whole career.
Are you ready to vote for democracy and for America? Let me ask you, are you ready to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, President and Vice President of the United States?
A day before the convention kicked off, the Democratic Party released its platform document, outlining its goals and policy priorities. The 92-page paper says the U.S. has and will continue to stand by its allies, especially South Korea, against North Korea's provocations, including its illegal buildup of missile capabilities. But the latest document did not directly mention the United States' pursuit of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, unlike the version in 2020, when it included a pledge to build a sustained, coordinated diplomatic campaign to advance the longer-term goal of denuclearization. Regarding the matter, South Korea's foreign ministry said the U.S. and the international community are strongly committed to achieving denuclearization, adding that it'll continue to closely work with Washington on North Korean issues, regardless of the election result. Meanwhile, just a few hours before the key speakers took to the stage at the Democratic National Convention, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump visited Pennsylvania, an important swing state that he hopes to win. Speaking to a crowd at a manufacturing facility, he mostly focused on economic messaging, while predicting that it will result in a financial ruin for the country, and Pennsylvania in particular if Harris wins.
I'm here today to deliver a simple message. When I'm back in the White House, America's future will be built right here in Pennsylvania.
In recent polls, Harris has been narrowing the gap with Trump, both on a national scale as well as in battleground states like Pennsylvania, which could determine the results of the election in November. Pei-Yun-ji, Arirang News.
Gold prices are continuing to stay high as traders await indications on the Fed's rate cuts this year. Spot gold leveled out at just over $2,500 per ounce on Tuesday after surpassing the mark last Friday for the first time and making a standard gold bar worth over $1 million. Gold prices have surged this year on the back of expectations that the Federal Reserve will make its first interest rate cut in September. Investors will be monitoring the Fed's July policy meeting minutes and Chair Jerome Powell's speech speech at the annual Fed meeting in Jackson Hole. In other news, Ukrainian soldiers are striking deep within Russia's Kursk region as President Zelenskyy speaks of setting up a buffer zone in Russian territory. Yoon-jin has more.
Russia confirmed Monday that Ukraine has attacked and damaged a third bridge located along the Seim River in the Kursk region. Ukraine has yet to comment on the strike, but 2 bridges were already strategically targeted and destroyed within the past week, with military analysts saying they were part of critical supply lines for Russian troops defending the area. It's been 2 weeks since Ukrainian forces began a shock incursion into Russia's western region, an operation that President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says is achieving Kyiv's objectives, which include wearing down Russian forces and carving out a buffer zone. Zelenskyy added that his troops were unleashing what he described as maximum counteroffensive actions. Russia's emergencies ministry reported that more than 121,000 people had been evacuated from 9 border districts in the Kursk region. Zelenskyy said Monday that while Ukraine's allies have supplied long-range weapons, they have also imposed restrictions prohibiting the use of weapons deep inside Russia. He urged allies to loosen curbs so that the Russian invasion could be halted.
If partners removed all existing restrictions on the use of weapons on Russian territory, we would not need physical entry, particularly into the Kursk region, to protect our Ukrainian citizens in the border area and destroy Russia's potential for aggression. However, for now, we cannot use all the weapons available to us and destroy Russian terrorists where they are.
Such restrictions were put in place to avoid crossing red lines set out by Russian President Vladimir Putin. But Zelenskyy urged allies to be bolder in supporting Kyiv.
We are now experiencing an extremely important ideological shift, namely the entire naive, illusory concept of so-called red lines regarding Russia, which dominated the assessment of the war by some of our partners.
Zelenskyy also said on Monday that Ukraine now controls over 1,250 square kilometers of Russian territory, including 92 settlements. As Ukraine demands a full withdrawal of Russian troops before any sit-down for peace talks, Russian presidential aide Yuri Yushakov said that the latest incursion has pushed the prospect of any such talks further away. Meanwhile, despite the war at home, Russian President Vladimir Putin departed on Monday for a 2-day visit to Baku to uphold Moscow's historic role of mediating peace negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
With the U.S. State Secretary in Tel Aviv, Israel has reportedly agreed to a proposal aimed at bridging the gap over a ceasefire in Gaza. The U.S. is calling on Hamas to do the same. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel on Sunday in the hope of getting Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire and hostage release deal. During his visit, Washington's top diplomat also held talks on Monday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog. After their sit-down, Blinken said that Israel had agreed to the U.S.-led proposal while calling on Hamas to do the same.
In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. And then the parties, with the help of the mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, have to come together and complete the process of reaching clear understandings about how they'll implement the commitments.
Despite Israel's agreement, Blinken said that even if Hamas accepts the deal, a number of complex issues would remain for mediating nations and negotiators to work on, but did not elaborate on what those issues might be. But with past ceasefire deals failing, Israel and Hamas continue to blame each other for the lack of agreement. Hamas on Sunday accused Netanyahu of putting conditions on the deals that only benefit the military in prolonging the aggression in Gaza. However, Netanyahu on the same day stressed that Israel cannot just give and give, hinting that it's not willing to accept conditions put forth by Hamas. Meanwhile, Israel conducted airstrikes targeting a Hezbollah weapons depot inside Lebanon. According to a report by Reuters, citing security sources, the strike did not result in any fatalities. However, Lebanon's health ministry said 8 were injured, including 2 Syrian children. The Israeli military said that it conducted airstrike on a number of Hezbollah weapons storage facilities, adding that with the presence of secondary explosions, large amounts of weapons were destroyed in the attack. The latest airstrike is the second targeting Hezbollah weapons depot in the past 3 days, as the Israeli military targeted another on Saturday, leading to 10 deaths, including 2 children. 이 승재, 아리랑 뉴스.
The 9th typhoon of the season, Jongdari, is forecast to bring heavy rain and strong winds to the south coast and Jeju Island. Once it reaches waters west of Mokpo around midnight, it will be downgraded to a tropical depression and continue to head towards Sokcho in Gangwon-do province. Waters of Jeju have been under typhoon alerts, and hot, moist air should pour down on the south coast. Until tomorrow, there could be 100 millimeters of downpours. The rest of the country will see 5 to 60 millimeters of showers, and the capital area will see heavier rain on Wednesday. The typhoon didn't bring any heat relief today. The capital saw highs nearing 37 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Heat will stay overnight, with the capital forecast to wake up to 31 consecutive tropical nights tomorrow. Highs will be similar or a couple of degrees lower than today, Seoul getting up to 31 degrees, Daegu, Gyeongju at 34. This year's heat waves will stay longer with more extreme temperatures, so stay safe. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.
Thanks for tuning in to Within the Frame. I'm Handan in Seoul. 40,000, that's the estimated number of Palestinians killed in the Israel-Hamas war, which has now stretched over 10 months. This conflict is one of the deadliest of the 21st century with no clear end in sight. The U.S. is making renewed efforts to broker a ceasefire, but finding a solution that satisfies both Israel and Hamas remains an immense challenge. Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine has taken a significant turn as Kyiv launched a surprise incursion into Russian territory, targeting key bridges and reigniting hope that Ukraine can beat Russia. For some expert insights into the current landscape and future prospects of the two ongoing wars, Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy joins me in the studio. It's always great to have you with us.
My pleasure, always.
Joining us virtually for another perspective is Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Professor Min, let's start off with you. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that Israel's Netanyahu has accepted what he called a new bridging proposal for a ceasefire deal. He added that this may be Hamas's last chance to end its 10-month war with Israel and urged Hamas to say yes. First and foremost, what are the remaining sticking points, and why is Hamas saying that the U.S. optimism is an illusion?
Well, I think that there are contrasting opinions about the outcome of the ongoing ceasefire talks in Gaza, but I expect that the talks will make progress, although the negotiation process could be tough. And probably my view could represent the other minority view. But anyway, I want to point out that these ongoing ceasefire talks would make the difference in terms of ceasing the fire in Gaza. As you know, Israel and Hamas still have an opinion gap about what should be done to cease the fire and release hostages, but both of them have the internal and external pressures to stop the war. On the one hand, the Israeli government has faced serious domestic criticism that it has not successfully eliminated Hamas militants from Gaza and has also failed to rescue the hostages. It also faces external pressure, especially from U.S., that it needed to accept what U.S. wants to cease the fire and release the hostages. On the other hand, Hamas also got internal and external pressures that it needed to find. First, the internal pressure that it needed to find a way to protect itself from the Israeli attacks. In addition, it needed to make progress with the ceasefire talks to provide Iran with a ground or space that it can avoid the situation where it should attack Israel directly. So taken together, I think these factors suggest the ceasefire talks will make a progress this time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Israel will completely cease the fire or end the war, because it will not. It makes sure that it will not stop the war until it will successfully root out Hamas militants from Gaza. So I think this is why Hamas does not trust Israel and argues that U.S. is too optimistic about making a deal. Making a deal or the other ongoing ceasefire talks is just earning time for Israel. Of course, the ongoing ceasefire talks could end up with just a temporary deal, but considering the situation where the Gaza has got so far, it's just still a meaningful break for hostage release and civilian safety in Gaza.
So it may not mean a complete end of the war, but there could be some progress. Yes. Dr. Davis, what are your prospects for the latest round of Gaza ceasefire talks? Washington is seeking an agreement within this week.
Well, I think what they're talking about at this point is a bridging agreement, essentially a temporary agreement to de-escalate. So Netanyahu is, in my understanding, has essentially accepted that. We are still waiting to hear back from Hamas as to whether they will accept such an agreement. I think that the risk is that if Hamas does not accept this agreement, and if the ceasefire talks fail on this occasion, then what you will see is that feared Iranian attack on Israel, potentially alongside an attack by Hezbollah in retaliation for the Israeli attack on Haniyeh in Tehran some weeks ago. This is an attack that we have all been kind of waiting to see happen. It hasn't happened up until this point, I think, because Iran, who after all is the sponsor and supporter of both Hamas and Hezbollah, want to see what happens with these ceasefire negotiations. So it is hanging by a thread. And I think that what we could see is either Iran putting pressure on Hamas to accept the bridging agreement or Hamas refusing. And I think the reason Hamas might refuse would be the current arrangements as being negotiated essentially don't necessarily imply a permanent end to the conflict. They imply a temporary ceasefire, a release of some hostages, but ultimately Israeli forces do stay within the Gaza Strip, and that may not be acceptable to Hamas. So I'm not that confident, to be honest. I think that chances are we will head into another round of conflict. The risk is that that conflict will then escalate as a result of Iranian attacks on Israel.
Well, Hamas just today accused the U.S. of merely buying time for Israel to continue its genocide. It seems Hamas and Netanyahu are still far apart, at least on the surface. Meanwhile, Dr. Davis, Israel ramped up its deadly airstrikes on Gaza, killing dozens across the Strip, while also attacking Lebanon, aiming for Hezbollah's ammunition depot, according to the Israeli military. How do you see these attacks that came ahead of Blinken's visit?
Look, I think it's important to clarify that this is not genocide. These are attacks that are going after Hamas, and Hamas is using Palestinian civilians as human shields. But at the same time, I have to say that the Israelis are conducting attacks. They're conducting these operations in a manner that's inconsistent with the laws of armed conflict. So it's not genocide, which is the deliberate destruction of an entire race of people. It is, however, the use of military force in a fairly dangerous manner that is not consistent with the laws of armed conflict. And that requires, the laws of armed conflict require discrimination between combatant and non-combatant, proportionality in terms of the size of the attack being employed, and necessity. Is that target really needed to be attacked? And I don't think the Israelis are necessarily following the laws of armed conflict. So that, combined with the fact that Hamas are using Palestinian civilians as human shields in a densely populated urban environment, is resulting in too many civilian casualties. And that's actually undermining Israel's justification, and it is high moral ground, if you like, for this war, which after all was started by Hamas.
Well, the United Nations says Israeli strikes are now relentless across entire Gaza Strip, but the international community is failing to take action against Israel, although it may not be a genocide. Now, Professor Min, some critics say that the U.S. is going too soft on Israel, providing too much military assistance. What's your take?
Yes, I also agree that U.S. is too soft on Israel and provides too much military weapons to Israel, although Israel does not listen to or they follow what U.S. wants for the war. As you know, President Biden has got many criticisms from Palestinian Americans and young voters who are very angry about Israel's attacks to Gaza and the terrible civilian casualties there. But the Biden government needed to support Israel as much as possible because for the United States, Israel is the most important actor or the ally to maintain the balance of power in the Middle East. If Israel is severely attacked and loses its power in the region, then the regional balance will break down and the U.S. regional policy towards the region will have to be completely reshaped. It will require the U.S. to spend lots of time, resources, and capabilities, lots of cost. Meanwhile, domestically, the Biden government and the members of the U.S. Congress needed to consider what Jewish Americans want for Israel domestically. As you know, Jewish Americans have got the tremendous influence over U.S. politics, economy, culture, and the society, or whatever you name. And in the meantime, it should be noted that the Biden government want to cease the fire in Gaza as soon as possible. As you remember, President Biden made the tough decision to bring U.S. troops back home from Afghanistan in 2021, despite the huge criticism from the political opponents like the Republican Party back time. And President Biden wanted to focus on tracking the rise of China, but unfortunately, he got the situation where he should cope with the two wars in Europe and the Middle East. And Trump criticized Biden that Biden is too weak and did not exert influence finishing the wars. And it is likely that electorally, the ongoing war in Gaza will be considered as a policy failure of the Biden government. So when the Israel-Hamas war will be over, could affect how much Democratic supporters will gather under the Harris, the candidacy. So we can see the Democrats, the dilemma that it should overcome before November.
So Washington's soft approach involves a complicated and a carefully calculated cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Davis, the world has been watching closely on Iran's possible retaliation against Israel's suspected killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, but we're yet to see Iran's response. What's behind the delay, and how do you anticipate the situation unfolding from here?
Well, as I said earlier, I do think Iran is waiting to see what happens with these ceasefire negotiations. But if these ceasefire negotiations fail, then I think you will see that Iranian retaliation. It will be a much larger scale attack than what happened in April of this year, and you will probably see a large-scale missile and drone attack by Iran against Israel directly at the same time as you would see attacks by Hezbollah, by insurgencies that are supported by Iran in Iraq and Syria, and even potentially by Hamas and also the Houthis in Yemen. And the differences between what happened in April, where Iran essentially gave the Israelis advance warning of when the actual attack would happen, is that this time around there will be no advance warning in spite of the weeks of delay. They'll go for surprise, and they'll also stage the attack in a manner that doesn't allow the Israelis and the Americans the best chance possible to essentially defeat the attack using integrated air and missile defense systems. So it will be a massive attack. It will be a surprise attack. It will be designed to overwhelm Israeli and US missile defense capabilities and inflict significant damage. And then, of course, the question you have to ask is, how does Israel respond to that attack if it happens? I think one of the likely moves on the part of the Israelis would be retaliatory responses, including against Iranian nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordo. So, this does have the real potential to escalate into a much wider regional war as a result. And that has significant risks for Iran. It obviously has significant risks for Israel. And so I think both sides are holding fire to see what happens with these ceasefire negotiations.
So the conflict between Israel and Iran now stands at a critical juncture, and much of it will depend on the latest round of ceasefire talks. Professor Min, shifting gears now to the war in Ukraine. The country caught the world and Russia off guard with its surprise incursion into southern Russian territory. Why did Kyiv seek a sudden attack into the Kursk region, and how was it possible?
Well, I think there are several reasons why Ukraine surprisingly attacked into the Russian territory, Kursk. And among them, I just want to point out two of them. On the one hand, I think Ukraine wanted to show the international community, especially U.S., that it can fight effectively like Israel if U.S. and possibly NATO member states continue to provide the military weapons to the country. The Ukrainian government could learn a lesson from Netanyahu or Israel that it can continue to conduct the war for itself or by itself if it has got enough weapons from the United States. And with the weapons, the Ukrainian military could do more to defeat the Russia in its territory. It suggests that it's like the Ukraine is protesting to the United States that it needs to be treated more seriously and more weapons should be provided to the country. And on the other hand, I think Ukraine possibly is preparing for the upcoming or the possible ceasefire or the truce negotiation with Russia that could occur sometime early next year. As you know, Ukraine is going through the tough time in terms of the conducting war, mainly because the international community, especially United States, is losing the interest in the war. As the war prolongs, many countries, including U.S., feel fatigue and become less enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine. In addition, the upcoming U.S. presidential election could significantly affect the war. Specifically, if President Trump wins the election, Ukraine may be forced to come out the negotiation to stop the war. So in order to prepare for the potential negotiation, Ukraine needs a territorial guard that take back its territories that Russia has occupied. Of course, it's uncertain at this point whether or how long Ukraine could occupy the Russian territory, but I think Ukraine is just doing what it can do. But unfortunately, I think that the overall situation is getting worse for Ukraine as time passes by.
Dr. Davis, how do you assess Russia's initial response to Ukraine's surprise incursion, and what implications can we draw from it?
The initial response was disarray on the Russian part. I think they were caught completely by surprise. So it was a major intelligence failure on the part of their military intelligence not to see this attack coming. And then they didn't have effective forces positioned to be able to defeat the Ukrainian incursion. You had Russian forces surrendering en masse to the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians have actually made significant progress in this incursion into Kursk. I think that what you will see now is the Ukrainians culminating, and that's a military term, meaning that they've reached the limit of their expansion and they can't go forward any further. And then they will seek to consolidate their control of a territory to establish defensive lines and, as your guest says, hold on to that territory in the sense of it being a negotiating chip in a future ceasefire negotiation. But the other point I would make is that the Ukrainians have also hit 3 bridges, which essentially deny the Russians the ability to provide logistic support to their forces in Donetsk and Luhansk. And that's a significant victory for the Ukrainians. So the Russians will be really pressured to find some way to counter this. They'll start to build up their forces and be better positioned to be able to push the Ukrainians back. But it may not be able to be the case that the Russians totally eject them from their territory. So the Ukrainians will basically exploit the advantage of the defense against the Russian offense that may be weak and disorganized.
The bigger question is, how would the war unfold from here? As you pointed out, would Ukraine's destruction of key bridges in southern Russia have a significant impact going forward?
It could. I mean, if the Russians can't retake and rebuild those bridges, then they'll be stressed to resupply their forces in Donetsk and Luhansk. That will weaken them over time, such that potentially in 2025, the Ukrainians could go on the offensive to try and force the Russians back in Donetsk and Luhansk. But it does depend on whether that Western military support continues to flow. if you do have a change of administration in the White House and President Trump returns to the Oval Office, then it's quite possible American military assistance will dry up very quickly, and then the Europeans will be hard-pressed to fill that gap. And so you then could have a situation where Ukraine is under real pressure and may be forced to essentially pull back from defensive positions in near eastern Donetsk. And I think that would be a very dangerous situation that could occur in 2025 if Russia does emerge as the victor in this conflict, because that would then embolden Putin to be more aggressive beyond the borders of Ukraine. He would have time to rebuild his military capabilities using his military industrial advantages. And I think the real concern in NATO at that point is that Russia would be tempted to try his luck in terms of confronting NATO directly along its eastern frontier, particularly if a President Trump is not willing to honour US commitments under Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
So U.S. assistance still remains the key in shaping the war going forward. Professor Min, we have just about 75 days to go until the U.S. presidential election. Could you give a rough scenario of what Washington's policy on the war in Ukraine would look like under Harris and Trump's presidency?
Well, I think that the Ukraine war could be one of the foreign policy issues that the outcome of the upcoming president election could significantly influence. First, if Harris wins the election, it is expected that she will hand down the policy orientations of the Biden government. So it is likely that Harris government will continue to support Ukraine against Russia's illegal invasion to the Ukraine territory. So U.S. will continue to provide Ukraine with the military weapons and economic aids. And the NATO member states will also continue to send their support for Ukraine under the U.S. leadership. Meanwhile, if Trump wins the election, it is likely that Ukraine war will face a significant change. President Trump often mentioned during the campaign trail that he would bring peace back to Eastern Europe and finish the Ukraine war by mediating a truce or the peace negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. And he criticized President Biden that he was too weak and failed to maintain peace in Europe. Trump also mentioned that he would stop the war by bringing the two leaders, Zelenskyy and Putin, back to the negotiating table on the first day of his second presidency. It means that, again, Ukraine could be forced to sign a truce or the peace agreement, although it does not fully represent its interest in the war. In addition, President Trump will also push NATO member states to pay back to the United States because U.S. spent tremendous amounts of money to support Ukraine, although NATO member states did not spend much. So it suggests that the relationship between U.S. and NATO could get worse under the second Trump presidency. It suggests that it's not clear whether the U.S. NATO member states would continue to support Ukraine if the Trump, the hold back is the support for Ukraine. Anyway, it seems to be clear that Ukraine is paying very serious attention to the outcome of the U.S. presidential election.
All right, we'll leave it there tonight. Thank you for your presence with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Davis, for sharing your valuable insights.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.
There is no greater blessing than to have good health